All right, folks, buckle up. Today we're breaking down Grist the Huntertide and Duel Commander. This commander is part bug factory, part removal spell, part graveyard engine, and all business. You want grind? You got grind. You want inevitability? Say hello to the Swarm. If you like mid-range that bites, value that multiplies, and winning games one sacrifice at a time, this is your jam. Let's cook. Today I'd like to introduce my host, Grant Johnson, of Mile High Mana Renown. Grant, please feel free to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hey Bo. Thanks for having me on, man. Like we were just saying before we hopped on here, it's unusual for me to be the one riding shotgun, but I'm excited to talk about Insect Queen here today.
Yeah, your list is spicy, and I've had the pleasure to talk to you about it since two MagicCon in Las Vegas ago. So, and obviously you're popping off locally and doing really well. What was that, last weekend or the weekend before? You went 3-1. So I think this deck is sweet. I think there's a lot going on here, and yeah, I'm excited to talk about Grist today.
Yeah, man. I'm happy to sort of shine any light on this deck as much as I can. I know it's not like the most played deck in Duel Commander, but it's the only deck I've ever played in Duel Commander. So, and I've played probably almost 500 different cards under this commander. So, happy to chat about its iterations, and I think I'm coming up on basically a year of playing Duel Commander. Whenever Vegas was last year, when I did the first Duel Commander Cup.
Awesome. Very, very cool. Yeah. Let's start with the commander overview, and then you can kind of give me some additional insights. So Grist is weird in the best way. It's a planeswalker, but it's also a creature in other zones. Plus makes bugs while fueling your graveyard, the minus snipes creatures, and the ultimate drains out life totals. This is a value stapled onto more value with a side of insects. What drew you to Grist?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it goes back to like Legacy. I mean, my whole experience with Magic always goes back to playing Legacy, and that was right after I had registered 4 copies of Grist at Eternal Weekend. Or no, I guess it was the year before. It was Eternal Weekend 2023. But I was on a big Grist Agatha's Soul Cauldron Guy's Cradle kick. Absolutely fell in love with the card. It does so much. It really helps bolster wherever you're at in the game, because it has 3 very different effects that I think, help you position yourselves in a way where it's great as a head card, and it can be really good as a behind card. So I've always also just sort of, I guess, floated towards like green creature combo-y, green creature value decks. And it's always been something that like I've really enjoyed playing. And I've played all sorts of different decks and colors and Legacy. I've been the blue deck, I've been the combo decks. But like I'm happiest when I'm in the saddle with some high quality green creatures.
Yeah, no, completely understandable. I mean, this Grist is such a weird card in the best of ways. Like, obviously not necessarily in this format, but you can GSZ for it in the graveyard. It's a creature. It's such a, I don't know, such an interesting design aesthetic that I personally, it scratches a certain part of my brain that I'm pro Grist. So awesome. Let's talk about some of the strengths of the deck. So you have, like you said, you have built-in removal in the command zone. You've got a ton of tutors, and not only, I don't want to say you've got combos, but obviously within your list, you've got Vampire Hexmage and you've got Dark Depths. What do you feel are some of the strengths of your list in particular, and the overarching archetype of, the rock, so to speak?
Yeah, I think the strengths of my list, I don't think this is the best Grist list either, by the way. I mean, I think I'm running some really janky cards that I just really enjoy playing, and a lot of the times they work out well. Sometimes they looked like cards that were printed 20 years ago, if you know what I mean. So
Hey,
really,
listen, one person's bulk bin jank is another person's treasure. I mean, for how long were people laughing about Urza's glasses, and now people are playing them in the main deck 60. So, I'm pro jank.
yeah, no, definitely. I agree. And it's always more fun when you're playing stuff that like is just sick. Like just doing the cool thing is like where I like to be with Magic, because I think we're kind of stuck in a lot of formats that, and I know this is adjacent to Duel Commander, but a lot of formats, it just feels like you only have a few options. Here, I think that the world is my oyster, so I can build Grist however I want. I've built Grist in a very combo manner. I've built it even rockier than this version. Right now, where it stands, though, is it's basically a Merit Lage deck with a Grist backbone. Grist is like the butter, and then Merit Lage is the guns, as Phil Blackman would say. So, you have to break Grist down into its parts to understand the whole of it. And Grist is really 3 different cards in one card. it's well, one, it's a creature on the stack, so only certain different, there's only certain ways that you can interact with it on the stack, which I know we're going to get to later. But it's Bitter Blossom, it's Dreadbore, and it's a really slow Fireball. So if you look at that is sort of a sum of its parts, you get Grist, but in gameplay and in practice, you kind of have to pick, which three effect you're trying to go for. And like if you're Bitter Blossoming, that means you're slow Fireballing. If you're Dreadboring, that means you're not bitter Blossoming and you are still Fireballing. So the Fireball is sort of a part of the first two modes, but the first two modes kind of go against each other. So being able to forecast turns ahead is really important, especially when you look at Grist loyalty and like how aggressive your opponent is, like or the aggressive deck that they are, versus maybe a slower controlling deck. Does that help answer your question?
No, I think that answers it very decisively. So thank you for that. Yeah, your deck it's the rock. It grinds. It's what this deck does. You know what I mean? Just when you think you're tapped out, it's like, oh no, I've got a whole nother lever to pull here. And I think just Grist facilitates that so much. And I'm really excited to talk about some of your creature packages here. So when looking over your list, things that excite me, let's go off the top. I mean, E-Witness loops, love that. You've got Fiend Artisan to tutor up some stuff. You even have Hogak on here now, recently unbanned and off the watch list. I want to talk about Honest Rustin. How do you feel this card plays within the shell?
This card's bonkers. You're very rarely ever E-witting for a non-creature. Like if you're doing that, you're usually picking up like one of the many reanimates in the deck, or you're picking up like a demonic tutor. But for the most part, you do want to be picking up a creature to keep looping, because there's so many creatures in this deck that if your opponent doesn't answer them, they just die. So it forces them to have multiple copies of many different forms of answers. So that all to be said, like Honest Rutstein, I would say is somewhat of a better version of Eternal Witness, because it does have equity after the turns that you cast it. So if you're picking up, a 2-mana Barrogoyf, a 1-mana Tarmogoyf, it sort of spirals out of control. Especially when like you can also endurance loop your graveyard. So, I've had in the past where I can endurance, I can stack it so that the endurance goes back in my deck for me to Zenith or Invasion of Ikoria for anything that I put back. I'm kind of rambling here a little bit, but honestly, it's just in full support of the deck's ability to like never say die.
Awesome. So to bridge off of that, I was going to talk about, you're one of the few decks that actually plays a battle. And I think that's awesome and sweet because it grows your Barrogoyf and your Tarmogoyf. So I love that. Another card I want to bring up is Dinosaur Egg. What a sweet card. I love what's going on here with this. The evolve mechanic, then you get to discover X, where X is its toughness. When it dies, you're automatically discovering 3 if this dies. What brought you to bring Dinosaur Egg into the mix?
Yeah, so Dinosaur Egg, I actually can't really take credit for. There's been a lot of Grist creators in France that have been playing Dinosaur Egg, and it makes a lot of sense because the deck very rarely has any card in it that can't go on the stack immediately. So, like, really the only things I can think of would be like Duress or Thoughtseize if your opponent has an empty hand, or like a removal spell if they have an empty board. But other than that, everything else is a hit. So a Dinosaur Egg is really cool too because you can trigger it yourself. It's not just a body that you wait for it to die. Like you can actually just play it and fling it with Grist and then discover 3. And the value there is just like immeasurable sometimes, especially when you're just like, yeah, play Dinosaur Egg. I'll kill your planeswalker. I'll kill your commander. And then I just rolled off of, White of the Reliquary off the top and discovered into that. And now you got to be thinking about Mirror Age in 2 turns.
Yeah. I love the angles that this support card provides. And it's just pure synergy with Grist. Like you said, you just get to fling it and then get to do its thing. That's pretty awesome. I also see that you've got Overlord of the Baelmerk in here. Big proponent of that card. It just seems to play so well with what your deck's already doing. Just, sacking things to the graveyard and recurring them. So awesome. Let's talk about Evasion of Ikoria. I know we brought it up briefly. What are the main targets we're going to get? Is this just solely go get Vampire Hexmage, or is this more, obviously it has toolbox aspects to it, but if you could, just give me your best, 2 or 3 tutor targets.
Yeah, I mean, I would say 9 times out of 10, you're getting the Hexmage. The other 10% of the time, you're just getting whatever you need in the moment, because it is a toolbox deck. So if you need Orcish Bowmasters, if you go grab that. If you need a Fiend Artisan to keep setting up, go grab that. But it is usually the Vampire Hexmage. And, for the listener that doesn't know, you get the Hexmage, and then you can immediately sack it and take all the counters off the siege. and then it flips into some big dumbass, for lack of a better term. I don't know the name of it off the top of my head, but it's
it's Zealothora, Apex of Ikoria, sir.
yeah, bless you. And so this thing basically is unblockable, and it makes all the other creatures that you have effectively unblockable. So this is a really good combo because it's just an 8/8 unblockable goofball with reach, and then everything you turn sideways is going to get through. So it's really good against those decks that like are combo decks where they can close the game out super fast, or maybe you're against like a red aggro or a control deck and they're like a turn away from Supreme Verdict, and you're able to just kind of get things sideways and crack them upside the head for like 12 points of damage. And when you do that, and then they go, okay, well, now I'll use my Supreme Verdict. It's like, okay, cool. Well, Grist is about to hit you for another 7 because you just killed my whole board.
Right. Yeah, you're going to need a farewell or something extreme like that to really clear the way from that Grist not even ultimate, but it's third. Awesome. Okay. Moving right along to the other things that you have in this deck. A pretty standard sorcery package. You've got Demonic Tutor, Duress, GSZ, IOK, Into the North. I like that there's Mind Twist in here. I feel that's an underrepresented card in the meta. I feel like far too many people are just like, oh, just let the black decks play it. It's like, no. Like everybody, I shouldn't say everybody. A lot of people should be playing. There should be more Mind Twist in the format is where I'm going with this.
And this is also the best Mind Twist deck that you could have. Like you're playing, I think it's 11 dorks, 10 dorks, something like that, which help you get ahead of the curve. And so like by turn 3, you could be twisting for 4. And like that's just backbreaking. And like Mind Twist is kind of tough in the lower to the ground black decks that are just playing 1 land a turn, trying to get their hand empty, with like Dothies and Cecils. Shout out to your homie Cecil. But like this, I can't think of a better deck to leverage a card like Mind Twist, and I don't see it in enough Grist lists.
I think that's a very apt description there. So I completely agree with you on that. Making our way downtown, I see you've got Crop Rot. That makes sense. Tainted Pack, Mausoleum Seekers. A little bit of a interesting card here in Lethal Scheme. What prompted that? Is that borrowed from another list? Where's this card lie within the package and deck in general?
I did see this in another list, and I think it makes a ton of sense because it's effectively a free removal spell, and it's like it takes the spot of Snuff Out, and I don't like Snuff Out in Duel Commander, at least not right now. It seems like black is pretty highly played. Like you have to be playing against like Aragorn, Vivi, and Cloud over and over again for Snuff Out to even be live.
Right.
So this takes a good spot of Snuff Out, where you can effectively make it free because all of the insects that Grist makes, they're all black. And so you can end up convoking them. So you can, draw, like you can connive 3 cards, 4 cards sometimes, fill up the graveyard with any of the garbage or even more creatures for the fireball that we're talking about.
Yep.
And it also hits planeswalkers. So that's like another big benefit over Snuff Out because there are some planeswalkers that like are kind of a problem for Grist. So in like Grist, the Dreadbore ability, I feel like people always consider like, oh, well, Grist is a removal spell. And like it is, but there is a pretty significant cost to actually, launching that. And I always sort of lean towards the side of like, let me just keep developing my board. If Grist dies, I'll put it in the bin and hopefully I can find a reanimate spell or some sort.
Right.
And so cards like Mausoleum Secrets are, ways to pick up cards like your Lethal Schemes or any reanimate for Grist. Like, and when I say reanimate, obviously the card's banned. My reanimates are Unearth, Animate Dead, Chthonian Nightmare. And Chthonian Nightmare. I can't wait to get to that card.
I'm excited to talk about that. Okay, moving right along on your list. Obviously you have Skull Clamp. I feel like just about every deck in this format should be playing Skull Clamp. Do you agree with that assessment?
I mean, yeah, like if you're playing creatures, play Skull Clamp. If you're playing like Atraxa or like Elminster, don't worry about it. But
right.
It's if you're playing more than 20 creatures in your deck, odds of like, even if Skull Clamp can't go apeshit because you have a ton of like 1 toughness creatures, even if you have a couple 2 or 3 toughness creatures, just like being able to block profitably is still so good. And like as much as I love Skull Clamp in this deck, I think it's like the perfect Skull Clamp deck. I think Skull Clamp needs to be removed from this format.
I'm very interested to see what I want to say it's the 29th of September. It's right after MagicCon Atlanta is the next BNR cycle for Duel Commander. And with the popularity of Cloud, if that brings up the question of Skull Clamp, is it time for Skull Clamp to go? I don't know. We'll find out. But yeah, I'm interested to see that. Great. Let's move along to the enchantments. You've got some spice here. You briefly touched on Chthonian Nightmare. You also have Contamination, which in this deck just seems great. But let's start with Chthonian Nightmare.
Yeah, it's better than Recurring Nightmare. And I think when we talked about doing this too, I mentioned that, I'll get to Chthonian Nightmare, but I want to talk about the enchantments in general because there's two that I think are traps. And one of them is Survival of the Fittest. The other one is Recurring Nightmare. I don't think you need two nightmare effects because I'm playing Mausoleum Secrets. So that's effectively having two nightmare effects because Chthonian Nightmare is a strictly better version of Recurring Nightmare. If you look at my list, the only two cards that Recurring Nightmare can hit that Chthonian Nightmare can't would be Hogak and Overlord of the Baelmerk, and it never and Primeval Titan. But like that stuff never comes up, and it never really ends up mattering because Chthonian Nightmare being able to go 2 mana, pick up Grist, 2 mana, pick up Baragoyf. It's just the 1 mana difference is so crazy to me. Like it's I can't speak enough about the card, frankly, and it's what I demonic tutor for like almost always because it lets me have the flexibility of letting Grist die. So
Yeah.
that's like the Chthonian Nightmare versus Recurring Nightmare argument. Survival is a trap, and you shouldn't play it in your Grist deck. Play it in like your Elves decks or your other like more pointed creature combo decks. Here, Survival has no way of like having a recurring creature like Squee pop into your hand to make it beneficial. And you're often like, yeah, you can convert a dork into something else, but it's also still a 2 mana do nothing in a format that I think you can't afford to be doing 2 mana do nothing.
I agree with that. I think if anyone would know better, it would be you, seeing how you're big into pre-modern and elves there. And I agree with you that I feel that is a trap and not what you want to be doing. You have to have so much efficiency in this format. And I agree that if it's just sticking on the battlefield and doing nothing, like you said, you don't have that recursive threat in Squee. So nice call out there. What about Contamination?
Card's great. It's better than Blood Moon. I'll stand by that. It does one thing about Contamination that folks need to be aware of is that activated abilities of lands are still usable. So like folks can still make constructs with Urza Saga. Folks can still crack fetches and stuff, but the ability to turn off basic lands is what makes it better than Blood Moon because Contamination, like if it was Blood Moon, it'd be way worse against decks like Cloud. But sticking this against Cloud and saying you have no more white mana, I really hope that you found a Solitude or something of that effect. Or else this game's going to get really hard for you because I'm never going to block. I'm just going to keep my insects around to keep sacking to Contamination. It's really important. A couple other things, too, that are really important about Contamination is the fact that we have a ton of dorks that can make green mana, and we have Wild Growth. So we're not even necessarily getting cut off from our 2 colors. And even in the games where I can't make green, a lot of the time it just like doesn't matter because my deck can function without green better than 2, 3, even 1 color decks can function without their colors.
Awesome. I love that you called that out. Yeah, you just have so many dorks. Like, it's not an issue for you. Whereas like you're really putting the squeeze on so many other people by doing this. So great call out there. Continuing on your list, Wild Growth, pretty standard. We'll get into the mana base a little bit later in the episode, but all right, awesome. Any other strengths you want to call out before we move on to weaknesses?
Oh, yeah, I would just say like this deck really rewards forecasting. And I know that like every Magic player is like, well, of course I'm thinking a couple turns ahead. This deck really rewards like if you can look at your opening hand and know what you're doing on turns 5, 6, and 7. That's a really good spot to be in, especially when you're playing this deck. And I'm like not the best at it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not some guru that just knows everything at all times. But when I look at my opening hand and I know what my turn 1 through 3 looks like automatically, not even having to think about what my opponent's doing, and then knowing what I want the game to look like by turns 5, 6, and 7, I feel very comfortable. I feel very in my lane, thriving.
Excellent. I think that's a nice way to put that. So to wrap it up, if Grist were a friend, it is the one that always over-delivers. It kills creatures, spits out tokens, and still finds a way to close the game. Nothing is wasted, everything is used, and eventually the board is crawling. So moving right along to weaknesses. What do you feel are some of the weaknesses of this deck? Not necessarily matchup specific, but overarching ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed that some of my rougher matchup are typically the decks that are really good at going long because I don't close out games nearly as fast as I would like to. And then the decks that are like playing Dream Halls, like Lyra crushed me on Atraxa. Like those games, they lasted 30 turns, but they still didn't feel close in a lot of those regards. Especially if they can like hit a key piece with like the right counterspell, which happens in a one of format. Sometimes they're going to have the Tail's End, or they're going to have the Wash Away or Wipe Away or whatever it's called. Those moments can get really tough. Uniquely, though, we do have a lot of high equity creatures that make more creatures. So, like Fiend Artisan and Emperor of Bones and Eternal Witness, Honest Rutstein. So, we can grind, but it does hit like this sort of Balmer peak where the deck just can no longer grind. So, those decks that are slower, steadier, they might lose to the red decks frequently.
Right.
But their turns 9, 10, and 11 are the best turns in Duel Commander. This deck really, really struggles against.
That seems reasonable. I mean, like, you can grind with the best of them, but sometimes when you're playing against, as you brought up, Atraxa, it just goes so far over the top. It's just like they've essentially reset the game. You might as well be playing Charizard right now. You know what I mean? Like that's what it feels like. Okay. What about onboard graveyard hate? I know a lot of lists run, whether it be Nihil Spellbomb or Ghost Vacuum. How do those permanents impact your plan and your plays?
It impacts the phase of the game that I was talking about. We were forecasting turns 5, 6, and 7, and you're not forecasting for your graveyard being affected, and then all of a sudden you have to start worrying about some of those effects. So being able to kind of play on the fly and not necessarily putting all your eggs in any basket is, I think, the way you're the most successful with this deck. So that slow fireball we're talking about, don't make that your only win condition. Don't make that be what winning looks like, because all it takes is one Nihil Spellbomb to ruin your whole plan. And what that looks like, some folks will make early trades and be like, oh, I'll just fill my bin and then, hit them for 10. It's like, yeah, but you also just made some pretty atrocious trades. And now we're on, turns 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And our board state's not where we want it to be. So not leaning into the graveyard so much that one of those effects will destroy you, because they will destroy you. To your point, we're playing cards like Bloodghast. We're playing cards like Deathrite Shaman. We're playing cards like Emperor of Bones. And then a lot of the times I do put Grist in the graveyard. More than 50% of the time, I think I'm putting Grist in the graveyard, because I can pick it up with some of these Ewit and Honest Rutstein effects, or I can reanimate it. So that getting hit and then it having to go to the command zone and costing 5 is a really, really, really big deal. And usually it is a 2-for-1, because I'll be holding an Unearth, looking at a Nihil Spellbomb, what am I supposed to do here?
Right.
So, and it's also one of those few things that will force you to Urza's Saga for Haywire Might more than you will Skull Clamp, which always feels bad when you have to do that, because Skull Clamp's just a cracked magic card. But yeah, you have to be able to find a way to navigate, or the deck doesn't really function quite as well as you'd like, unless you're leaning into the Merit Mage plan. If you have a turbo Merit Mage draw, then great, who cares about the graveyard?
Right. No, that makes complete sense. I do like the fact that you do have that explosive start, you know what I mean, where you can have a turn 2 Merit Mage, which is pretty awesome in its own right. But that's not the end all be all. I feel like that's your plan B or C, honestly. I might be wrong. Feel free to correct me.
I don't know, man. I just these days I'm just making Merit Mage as fast as possible, because Duel Commander decks just aren't super well equipped to deal with that, but Legacy decks are. There's very few effects that see a ton of Duel Commander play that can really impact it. And sacrifice effects are never going to work in this, in my economy, because I'll always have something laying around, whether that be an insect token. So Shieldred's Edict can't do the token death, the token sack on it.
Right.
Or I'll have constructs from Saga, or I'll have, other just additional creatures. So you have to basically have a plow or a bounce effect or a solitude or something. And, if you're giving me 40 life, cool. That gives me a lot of time.
It's a lot of time to make it work. Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think that's why I like Shadow Spear so much, just for that hidden line of text to remove indestructibility and hexproof. That has come up against Merit Mage on a few occasions. So excellent. All right, to kind of just wrap up the weakness portion, this deck is not a race car. It is Bulldozer. Fast wins can be on point, but that's not really necessarily what you're going for. And the point is burying your opponents under value until they give up. The last thing I want to touch on with regards to this, and you brought it up, is the amount of turns that actually happen in Duel Commander. This is a huge reason why I love the format. I love that there's so much agency in the format. I love that there's so much deck building to be done, even with a top meta. And I like that games are not typically over by turn 2 or 3. I mean, don't get me wrong, Tifa exists. There are other decks that are out there, but by a large average, you're looking at like turn 6.5, 7, which I personally love. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that sentiment. Like, you have to be able to plan for the late game with every deck that you build. I know we're not at the mana base yet, but I also think a lot of folks are playing like they're not playing enough lands. And I'll go to the end of the earth saying that I'm not a math guy, but I don't know exactly what my mana base comes out to, but it's quite a lot of lands, and this deck can also take advantage of multiple lands really well. Um, and again, people will play like 31, 32 lands, and it's like, well, your commander just died, and now price of playing this game goes up by 2, and you're not drawing lands. So what's your game plan?
Yes, I agree with that sentiment. I love that you're not the math guy. Grant and I have had many conversations where I am decidedly the math guy and he is the vibes guy. But here, here he's coming in clutch saying like, no, the math needs the math. I need more land. So awesome. All right, let's move on to the core strategy. Let's talk about the early game, the mid game, and the late game. Early game, what are we trying to do? Is it stick a dork and just build out, or turbo out a merit lage? Where are we at with that?
Yeah, it really depends on your draw. I would say that this deck actually doesn't mulligan a ton, which is nice. And it's because I'm playing enough lands and I have dorks and stuff, and always having Grist in hand at the beginning of the game is really good. So for me, I mean, my ideal start is turn 1 dork of some variety. My favorite dork is Deathrite Shaman in this list, but like that's also, it's 1 card, right? So I've packed it full of additional dorks. The last dork that made it is Boreal Druid. It's definitely the worst one. It makes 1 colorless, but it's still, it's the reason why that card is in the deck is to maximize my ability of playing a Grist on turn 2. Before cards like, if I'm on the play, before cards like Counterspell and Memory Lapse and all of those 2 mana just banger counterspells become live. And if I lose to a daze, I like lose to a daze. It's 1 card, so I'm
Right.
usually trying to always rip Grist in there on turn 2. Or the other alternative is if I have like an Elvish Reclaimer or a White of the Reliquary start, that's usually the curve that I'll take too. And honestly, it's more of a preferred curve because you've seen the power of like Legacy Cradle Control, which starts on usually Elvish Reclaimer or White of the Reliquary. So this deck can operate in a very similar vein. Or if I get to untap with one of those cards, I actually can't remember a game that I've lost where I've been able to untap with one of those 2 cards.
Yeah, those are both cracked Magic cards, and it's sad that Cradle Control does not have a larger portion of Legacy's meta share right now, but who knows? For a while there, it was trending towards the top. It's a great deck. It's got a lot to offer it, and I like seeing those same strategies parallels here in Duel Commander, like you brought up with Right of the Reliquary. I think that's awesome. All right.
Yeah, and there's I'll give you sort of the third start, which this is much less common, but I will keep hands that just play like the Reed Duke black mid-range sort of game. So like if I look at a hand of 7 cards and I got 3 lands, I got like, a Barrogoyf, an Orcish Bowmasters, an Opposition Agent, a Tarmogoyf, something like that, I will still keep those hands. I don't mind going land, pass, land, hold up Bowmasters, or play a Tarmogoyf. Like those are some alternative starts, and it's the weaker start of the 3 that I've provided. But it's not like uncommon to keep, 2 creatures, 3 lands, a piece of hand hate, and a removal spell. Like that's just peak Golgari gaming.
Awesome. I peak Golgari gaming. That's nice. Additionally, all right. So we know what the early looks like. What does the mid look like? Now we're breaking down based off of these 3 preferred starts. What does our mid game typically look like?
The mid game is always determined by what my opponent's trying to do. So while I'm able to set up my plan typically earlier than most, I want to know what my opponent's plan is, and I can usually tell by the commander that they choose. But it's you're starting to hedge. The mid game is, how do I get out of the mid game to hedge for making it into the late game and then just eating them alive. So what that would look like against Cloud or VV or Deadpool is preparing for Cloud Skull Clan. For VV, it would be preparing for like VV Stasis or VV plus 11 spells in a row or whatever that looks like. So yeah, and the nice thing about Grist is Grist does such a good job of keeping my opponent's plan at bay because it kills all commanders. Grist says, I will kill your commander, and I'm also going to come out on turn 2 most of the time. So it puts them on notice that I'm willing to play the mid game better than them to make a late game that's untenable for them. So I I know I'm kind of rambling on this, but there's a lot of dynamics here, especially when we're talking about a full deck of one-ofs.
Right.
Every situation looks a little bit different, but I would say that the mid game, I'm never really pushing my plan along unless I have like a fast lage. I'm usually just playing the how do I get ahead of my opponent's plan?
I think that's a very well described plan. Again, like you said, we're playing 99 Singleton here with the commander. I think that's a great overarching heuristics, right? Like I'm not like asking for like, all right, so on turn 5, are we animate deading or are we wild growthing? What's you know what I mean? So on and so forth. So great. What about the late game? We talked about Grist fireballing. We've talked about Merrill Age. That's more the early game. If you can power that out, what does the late game typically look like once you've put your opponent, on the hand, so to speak, and a game plan?
Yeah, I mean, what I've noticed too, like against the top decks, if I've made it to the late game, I've won. It's sort of like dealer's choice as to what I want to do in the late game against decks like Deadpool, VV, Cloud. Aragorn is tough to get to the late game, but if you do get to the late game, you sort of wax that deck. I have a specific hatred for it because it's pretty tough to get to the late game. But if you do, the deck only really struggles in the late game against very few decks. And like I said, it's those big mana decks that like they thrive in the late game and they're built for the late game. Whereas my deck is like, it's built for all phases of the game, but it's not going to be Michael Jordan in all phases of the game.
Right. This is more a Tony Kukoc.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good one.
All right. Excellent. So the plan is simple: crawl, walk, swarm. Now we're going to move on to some key cards and synergies and combos. So let's start with Fiend Artisan. What are we doing with Fiend Artisan?
Good question. So Fiend Artisan takes 2 roles. Fiend Artisan is a better Tarmogoyf, usually. It's just fire design Tarmogoyf, but it's also Green Sun Zenith. So, Fiend Artisan, if I'm able to untap with it, again, it's one of those cards, or if I can untap with it, I can turn an insect into whatever I want in my deck. Outside of, again, like some of those bigger mana spells, Hogak, Primeval Titan, Overlord of the Balemark. But, Fiend Artisan, I typically like to, the first thing I do is to go grab Sylvan Safekeeper because that card is busted.
Yeah.
And it allows all those it allows all those cards that have to be answered it makes them completely unanswerable. And I don't mind. Like, this is what I'm saying about playing as many lands as you can, because I don't care about sacrificing 3, 4, 5, 6 lands in a game. Once I'm already ahead, it's really hard to catch up if you can't remove some of these things. So Fiend Artisan will typically get a lot of my anchors being, like I said, the Sylvan Safekeeper. It can also go grab like your Vampire Hexmage, which is a really key piece. If I need to pick up a key removal spell or reanimate spell that I milled over, I can go grab my Eternal Witness or my Honest Rutstein. Because in a weird way, the way that this deck is sort of set up in the mid and late game is that Grist milling is also kind of a demonic tutor because I have so many things that can grab stuff out of the graveyard, and Grist just allows that access.
I think that's a very apt way to put it. And I know we've brought up Vampire Hexmage on a number of occasions, but I also love the synergy with Hexmage and Overlord of the Balemark or opposing Planeswalker commanders like Elminster. Like it's just so good. And not that that's a hidden mode because it's not, but like I love that synergy personally. So
here's another one that I think you'll like too. That's come up before. But if you Tidebinder Grist, so that's happened to me a few times. I can actually Hexmage, kill my own Grist, and then either reanimate it or play it out of the command zone. Which is, usually if you Tidebinder a Grist, it's stuck. There's nothing that I can do about it. But Hexmage actually allows me to free that up again.
Yes, that's pretty sweet, and that was going to be a segment for a portion for our next segment, but I'm glad you brought it up here. Any other additional key cards or like really synergistic plays that you think with regards to this deck?
You need to have a really good understanding of like where you're at in order to play a lot of these cards. So being able to properly cast Mausoleum Secrets, being able to properly cast Tainted Pact, or being able to properly cast Demonic Tutor. Like those are the biggest things that are going to improve your win rate with a deck like this, because this deck, as cool as it is, and like we've talked so highly about it so far, it's not playing the best cards that you can be playing in Magic the Gathering. Like just straight up. We are playing kind of a series of bastard children that all play really well together. and they don't really like individually hold a candle to a lot of what these other top meta decks are doing. So being able to sort of build the story with the cards that you do have is the most important thing.
Excellent. I think that's a great way to close out this segment. I want to ask you, seeing how you're playing 39 plus lands, how often are you tainted pacting for a land? For the rest of us out here in this format, it's quite often.
Pretty much never,
Yeah.
honestly. When I tainted pact, it's almost always for like one piece of the Merit Lage combo. But you have to be very careful that like you don't tainted pact over something that you're gonna need later. So that's one of those cards that like I've almost gotten to the point of cutting tainted pact just because I'm so scared of playing it wrong. And I think that that's obviously a player skill issue more than anything. But you shouldn't be tainted pacting for lands most of the time. There will probably be a day that comes up where, I'm really slim on, lands, even though almost 40% of my deck is lands, and I'll have to tainted pact for a land. But I haven't gotten to that point yet, I think, just because of my deck construction.
Okay, great. Let's move on to some interactions to know. You just previously brought up Hexmage with Grist if it's tie bindered. What are some other key interactions that you should know and put in your back pocket if you're going to pilot a deck like this?
Don't let anyone spell pierce or force a negation your Grist. It's not allowed. It's not legal.
That is not legal. Yes.
It's a little confusing, and try and be kind to your opponent when they're like, "What are you talking about?" And it's like it's a creature, and then when it's in play, it's like it's not a creature. It's a planeswalker. You can't fatal push it. Like just try and be as cool as you can about that stuff because it is really confusing, frankly, and it does cause a lot of like judge questions. Other interactions, so animate dead and Grist. Most people probably aren't super familiar with this, but you can animate dead Grist, and the animate dead actually automatically falls off, and Grist stays because the Grist is a creature on entry. It's a creature in the graveyard, but it becomes a planeswalker on entry. So it's granted the entry via animate dead, but animate dead can't be equipped to a planeswalker. So
right.
It's just 2 mana, get Grist back. So that's something that's important to know. There's a bunch of insects in the deck. So if I look here real quick, let's see. Haywire Mite, Molt Tender, Springheart and Antuco. There's a couple other insects too that have been printed that I kind of want to add, but make sure you actually are checking your cards that you mill over and keeping track of what goes into the bin. One, any insect triggers Grist twice, which is basically
Huge.
flavor text most of the time. But yeah, being able to go up an additional loyalty and make an additional insect is huge. And it usually draws a sigh from your opponent. But I have actually worldly tutored for an insect to the top just to actually Grist twice to get it out of like lethal range or like, basically being able to say like my Grist is now at 5, so your 4/4 can't kill it.
Right.
That's something. And then looking here, I'm trying to think of any other unique interactions. This deck isn't like crazy on weird interactions. It's just kind of like very quality creatures that work well together. Dauthi Voidwalker can cause a lot of questions and things like that, depending on what you grab from your opponent. Into the North. So Into the North might look weird at first, but it's actually just puts Dark Depths into play. Because Dark Depths is a snow land.
Yep.
So that's something to keep in mind. Green Sun Zenith and whatchamacallit? Invasion of Ikoria. Those 2 cards, they can grab cards like Dryad Arbor, which is a land, but it's also a creature. It can also grab Grist if for whatever reason Grist gets shuffled into the library. So, which, sometimes it actually is correct. Like if you're holding a Green Sun Zenith and they like, subtlety your Grist, they put it on top and then you like want to fetch or something and put it back in the library, you can still Zenith it back out. So that's something worth noting. And then Delirium. Delirium is worth tracking here for Shifting Woodlands. So an interaction with Shifting Woodland is if you copy Dark Depths in the graveyard with Shifting Woodland, it becomes a Dark Depths with no counters. So Shifting Woodland automatically turns into Merit Lage.
That's a pretty awesome interaction. And obviously you've got to sack Shifting Woodland to it for the trigger, right? If I'm not mistaken, or no? Yeah,
you do have to sacrifice it. Yeah, you have to sacrifice it.
Yep.
But it's a nice way of saying like, if you mill over your Dark Depths, all that means is that your White of the Reliquary or your Elvish Reclaimer, you just go grab Shifting Woodland. And it actually makes things easier because you don't have to sack Thespian Stage. And then Pendlehaven. So I don't know what it is about people in Pendlehaven. They have no respect. Uh, People just like ignore the fact that that card exists, smash in with a 2/2, and then I turn a 1/1 insect into a 2/3. And they're just like, oh shit, yeah, blah, 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 blah. If you're playing against this deck and your opponent has a Pendelhaven, don't be attacking with anything that's smaller than a 3/3. It just doesn't go well for you. And then let's see, any other weird interaction. Oh, Yavimaya and like Urborg allows Dark Depths to tap for mana.
Yep.
So that means you only need Depths, Thespian Stage, and any other mana producing land to make Mirror Age. So it's just a one cheaper Mirror Age.
Awesome. I think that that sums up a great list of interactions to know. So thank you for that, Grant. Moving along to the mana base. Obviously, you have to go singleton because you're playing Tainted Pact, and you've got some great utility here with Bojuka Bog, Beseiju, obviously Dark Depths, which we've touched on, Dryad Arbor that you can go fetch up. You have Hive of the Eye Tyrant, and I'm trying to look. We talked about Pendelhaven, Phyrexian Tower. That's just to afford you the ability to power out your Grist even faster. Or an early prime time with a bug if you've already landed a Grist. Let's talk about the artifact lands. Are they there because you just need two sources and you want to grow your goyfs? Is that the reasoning behind there?
They make constructs bigger, so Saga constructs get bigger. It is also part of Delirium, so helping turn on Shifting Woodland.
Yep.
And then the other reason too is actually a previous version of this list. If you're playing Beseech the Mirror, so you can sack your artifact lands as a bargain cost for that card. I'm not playing it right now, but it is a card that like, if someone's like, I'm playing Beseech the Mirror, I'm like, yeah, that's a really good Magic card. I don't blame you for playing it.
Excellent. Let's talk about some cards that aren't in your list that I'd love your thoughts on. Immediate Hatchery from the new Edge of Eternity's Commander set. Are you familiar with that?
No. What's that card do?
So it's pay 1 life, add black, put a hatchling counter on this land. When this land is put in the graveyard from the battlefield, for each hatchling counter on it, create a 1/1 black insect creature token with flying. Is there any consideration for this and using Sylvan Safekeeper like we were previously discussing, or is this just too cute?
I think it's pretty dope. Making insects, it's like kind of what the deck wants to do, right? I would just be a little bit like, outside of Sylvan Safekeeper, what other ways am I sort of getting rid of this land?
Crop Rot. That's the only other way that
Crop Rot.
I mean,
yeah,
you've got
Crop Rot, Safekeeper.
Safekeeper, the Knight, and you also have the Elf that sacks a land too. So you've got like 4 different ways to turn it on.
Yeah, I mean, like I could definitely see this card working for sure. And like, this is what I'm saying about my list. Like, if you're gonna carbon copy my list, just expect for it to like not be perfect because cards like this card I could definitely see being really, really good. Oh, and you can also reclaimer this land as well.
Yeah. So I was like,
that's
a newer thing.
Elf.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I could see this card being really good. And like, honestly, I'm kind of looking it over. I could try this thing. And maybe it has more equity than like, Vault of Whispers and something like this, because I only gave a couple reasons why Vault's like super relevant. I think the primary one was for Beseech the Mirror. And the secondary is more for Delirium. So, maybe Umidian Hatchery is good. And like, it helps me dodge a little bit of like meltdown effects or like shatters on my lands.
Yeah. Awesome. And then the other one that I was thinking of when I was looking over your list is Spymaster's Vault. How do you feel about Spymaster's Vault in a list like this where you have the ability to connive and, you're sacking creatures all the time? So is that a possibility, or is this just another cute land, one of the, most underplayed MH3 lands?
Oh, I see it. You just pinged me these here. So let me read this card over. Enters battlefield, tap, flash, control soul. Target creature connives X, Y system of creatures that died. The only thing like I'm leery of, I wish this card just came in untapped no matter what. And I think this is a snap include. And the reason why I say that is because if you actually look at the list, the amount of swamps, let's count them. We got Bayou.
And then I'm looking through your list with you.
Lands can count Overgrown Tomb, Snow-Covered Swamp. Then we have Urborg, Underground Mortuary. So I guess my concern here is like me having this as like a second land or something, or opening up with this, and it doesn't make black, and it also comes in tapped. So like I'm a little bit more leery of that. And I like the Hatchery card because it actually comes in untapped. You do have to pay a life for it, which can be rough against the red decks, but The Spymaster's Vault, I think I might have to adjust my mana base a little bit. I mean, all the fetches can be black sources, or swamp sources, I should say.
Right.
But that like basically puts it at around 18 or so actual swamps, which does concern me a little bit. And I know I just said I'm the vibes guy, but this is quick math.
This is not the same math. No, I completely get it. Okay. Awesome. I just wanted to bring those up for the listener that maybe like considering, or, maybe in the comments, like, well, what about this card or what about that card? And those were two off the top of my head that I was like, I could see the hatchery being really good with Grist because of the whole insect portion to it. And I just wanted to bring that up. Okay. We'll just move right along to closing tips, unless you want to divulge any more on the mana base. I feel like it's pretty self-explanatory, and I think we've done a good job covering that.
This might be a judge question for you, but if I have an Urborg and a Yavimaya, or one or the other in play with this hatchery, if I tap it for black without paying the life, I guess I wouldn't get the hatchling counter. You have to pay the life to get the counter.
Yes. Once you see that colon, that's what it's doing. So if you're just using it for black mana off Urborg, you would not put a hatchling counter on it.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'll try the card. It's probably worth $0 because most new cards are worth nothing now.
It's a whopping 35 cents. So,
oh man, I'm gonna have to take out a mortgage.
Awesome. All right. Closing tips. Let's start with versus control. How do you feel this deck is positioned versus control?
It's kind of tough. I think that you need to go fast. And like, it sounds crazy for the green deck full of creatures and stuff to like play into board wipe effects. But like using Atraxa again as an example, because I think it's one of the best, blue control decks that exist. You just have to get them dead. Like, you're not going to be high equity to win in the late game unless you just like really have the hooks in. Which it does take a while. They play a ton of removal and a ton of counter magic. So you have to play out of your mind to get the hooks in to where you're winning the late game. So you're better off just like gassing out as fast as you can. Like, maybe you're not even playing Grist on turn 3. You're going to be slamming cards like Barogoyf and Tarmogoyf and Endurance, like for a 0 equity Endurance, just to start delvering them to death. So that's kind of where I think that matchup goes, because there really isn't like a silver bullet in the deck that control is just like, ugh. Maybe it's Skull Clamp, just to like keep drawing cards and try to outvalue them.
Right.
But even then, Skull Clamp is really easy to kill with like Prismatic Ending or Marks of the Otherworldly Light or any Shatter, Naturalize, or Disenchant or whatever.
Hooligan's Command.
Yeah. I mean, there's a million different ways to destroy that card.
Yes. All right. Against aggro.
So aggro is a little interesting because there's a couple different like aggro decks. The burn decks are tough. I've had a hard time against like the mono red, like Feldon was probably like last year's hotness. But there are still a few just like red turbo aggro decks that like you sort of have to keep pace with them. And the second you stumble and they start hitting you for 5, 6, 7, 8, and like at that point in the game where I'm at like less than 10, I just don't feel like I'm ever going to win because they have enough just raw burn to the face that like I can't come back from it. And I probably should be playing Shadow Spear. And I have played it before, but I think if Skull Clamp were to get banned, Shadow Spear probably is a snap include.
All right. Nice future predicting there. Against the combo decks, the Liers, the One Sliver, Mississippi River, how do you feel about against those decks?
They're cooked. This deck just destroys any combo deck.
You just have a lot of interaction.
Yeah. Like, I'm going to destroy your hand. I'm going to destroy any creature that you put into play. Your artifacts and enchantments aren't safe. I also can put down a fast clock, a high equity clock. I can turn a Merit Lage on you very quickly. Like, I just have never, like, I don't think combo is good enough right now in Duel Commander. And like, combo can be a loose term. Like, some people are like, well, Cloud is a combo. Like, yeah, it's a combo. It's you play Cloud, you play Skull Clamp, you draw 4. I get that. I'm talking about the decks that like only rely on like
Rog tabs.
I need to get, like I'm playing Get Rog, or I need this Thought Lash. I need this Jace Architect. It's like, yeah, okay. Like, you're going to sit there and dirtle around, and I'm going to sit here and like destroy you with cards like Orcish Bowmasters or Opposition Agent. Like, easy things that those combo decks can't answer that will force them to stumble.
Right. Okay. Excellent. And then how do you feel against the mid-range decks of the format?
Yeah, I think that this sort of is where Grist falls on that spectrum, like that mid-range sort of category. I think that like give me a few mid-range decks to go off of here because it's
Sure.
such a mid-range is such a
Such a varied term.
arbitrary thing sometimes.
Yeah. Let's start with the biggest elephant in the room, Deadpool. How do you feel against Deadpool?
So Deadpool is actually unique in the way that it's not like a mid-range deck versus a mid-range deck. It's more of like I have my commander is uniquely positioned against your commander. So I feel like I'm in a better spot because if you just go like Deadpool, well, you can't do anything to Grist with Deadpool. You can only swap with creatures. And
Right.
then even if you give me the Deadpool, I can just play Grist and then use that as fling fodder for the Dread. So it's kind of hard to make Deadpool work against this deck. And I think that this is also where this deck is uniquely positioned because it does sort of eat the top meta decks alive. Like 2-0ing VV, 2-0ing Cloud, 2-0ing Deadpool, because of where it's uniquely positioned. So Deadpool is a different example because I think that, Grist is the antithesis of Deadpool.
I feel like if I'm the Deadpool pilot, games 2 and potentially 3, I'm probably swapping over to Croxa. Because, like you said, Deadpool is typically the sword of Damocles hanging over your opponent's commander. And when you have Grist out, it's just like, okay, well, I need you to play a high value engine. I need you to play a Baragoi for whatever it is. And any competent pilot's not going to make a Merit Lage in front of Deadpool. You know what I mean? So it's like, all right. So, okay, cool. The other ones I would bring up would be like Slimefoot and Squee and, Flage.
Yeah, I would say like those two decks are like really, really powerful. I don't know exactly where the matchup falls on like the 54 or the 60-40 or 50-50 spectrum. I will say that of all like the Boros mid-range decks that I've played, I've had pretty good success against them because they have a really hard time. It's hilarious to say this, but they have a really hard time answering like high toughness creatures. And like this deck is really good at putting out like Wall of Root, Baragoi, Tarmogoyf, a Hogak, the other side of Invasion of Ikoria. And then I'm also going to be killing your best thing that you have with cards like Grist. I can also gain a little bit of life here and there with Deathrite Shaman and Baragoi, but it's hard to sit here and say that my deck's better than their deck. I think in the mid-range mirrors, a lot of it's going to come down to skill, who has the better draw, and also like who knows where they're at. Because mid-range decks, their whole job is to decide what their plan is. Are they going to be the aggro deck or are they going to be the control deck? Because they have access to both to some degree. That's what makes them a mid-range deck. So whoever picks their plan early and often and sticks to it, I think is going to have more success than the deck that's like, I don't really know what I'm doing yet. I'm just going to kill the things that I think I need to kill, and I'm going to play the things that I think might be good.
Awesome. All right. That brings me on to one of my favorite parts of these deck guides, sample hands and heuristics. So let's start with sample hand number 1, Polluted Delta, Vault of Whispers, Takanuma, Mind Twist, Mausoleum Secrets, Honest Rustin, and Hogak. And these hands are, view them under the lens of you're on the play or draw. Just, give a breakdown. Is this a keep? Are we shipping it back?
We're shipping that one back on the play and the draw. That deck,
Okay.
that hand's just not going to be good enough. We're not doing anything until turn 3. There's no acceleration. There's also like Mind Twist isn't being the best version of Mind Twist without dorks. So I'm shipping that back for a better 6.
Excellent. Okay. Moving right along to hand number 2, Beseiju, Bloodstained Mire, Twilight Mire, Wastewood Verge, Haywire Might, Dismember, and Green Sun Zenith.
That's a keep. And if this was our 6th, it would also be a keep on the play and the draw. Reason being is, like I mentioned earlier in those like interactions to remember, is Green Sun Zenith can go grab Dryad Arbor. So the hand effectively has a dork. You said it was Mausoleum Secrets and Haywire Might?
It is Haywire Might and Dismember.
Dismember. So we have removal for creatures, we have removal for artifacts and enchantments, and then we have a turn 2 Grist. This hand's definitely a keep. We'll throw back one of the lands and carry on about our day.
Okay, awesome. Moving on to hand number 3, Urborg, Pendelhaven, Vampire Hexmage, Bloodghast, Demonic Tutor, Baragoi, and Legolas's Quick Reflexes.
Oh, that hand's gas. The Legolas's Quick Reflexes is actually not in the current list that I'm playing. I sent you over the updates, but I think Arash added that towards the end when I forgot to add like 11 cards to my list. But Quick Reflex is still a great card, don't get me wrong. I just really like the Urborg, Pendelhaven, Vampire, Hexmage interaction. So that also means like another thing that's cool about Vampire Hexmage is that it makes like 15 cards in your deck a live draw. And you can cast it with Urborg. So like you can obviously draw Dark Depths, you can draw Into the North, you can draw Elvish Reclaimer, White of the Reliquary, Crop Rotation, Invasion of Ikoria. Even it can even turn on Skull Clamp. Like you can clamp a Vampire Hexmage if you want to.
Right.
But that card, like, it doesn't see much play in Magic really anywhere. But here, like, I absolutely just love that card.
Awesome. All right. Moving on to our last hand. We've got Snow-Covered Swamp, Nurturing Peatland, Bloodstained Mire, Vampire Hexmage, Springheart Nantuko, Dinosaur Egg, and Fiend Artisan.
So that's a tough one because we're basically holding 4 of the same creature and then 3 of the same land. And what I mean by that is like the elbow cards of the deck. So the Fiend Artisans, the Vampire Hexmage, the Springheart Nantukos. We don't really have acceleration into Grist. So I think what I'm doing with this hand is if I'm on the play, I'm going to keep it. If I'm on the draw against anything red or fast, I'm probably going to ship it. Against if I'm on the draw against like Atraxa or Elminster or some of these other big control decks, Dragon Lord Ojutai, I'm probably going to keep it.
Okay, awesome. Then let's just end with this for this segment. What are some opening hand heuristics you try? I mean, we talked about it a little bit during the strengths of the deck and the early mid-game portion, but opening hand heuristics, if somebody's going to pick up this deck, is it always a dork, or is it okay not to have a dork if you have more of your classic Jund hand, as you previously described, with like Orcish Bowmaster, Tarmogoyf, etc.? What are some of the opening hand heuristics that you try and stay by?
Yeah, I mean, definitely you want to try and open with a dork. Another thing you want to consider is what does my life look like if the dork dies? So if you're keeping 2 lands in a dork and then you miss on land drops, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. If you're keeping 3 lands in a dork with some good interaction and maybe a high quality creature, like that's a really solid hand. You should always be considering your plans B and C with any opening hand here, because plan A is typically turn 2 gristing. So yes, like dorks are a great heuristic to have, but like I'm a big proponent of like what story am I about to tell my opponent? You know, like am I gonna be on the turbo grist game? Am I gonna be on the merit lage like turbo out, like basically become a lands deck? Is that the story I'm telling? You know, because if your hand is full of stuff that's like not really working together, or your mana base is a little shaky, and if like they kill your dork, you're in a lot of trouble. It's probably worth really evaluating if that's a hand that you want to keep. And typically, if you're going to keep a 2-lander, you can do that on the draw just because of how many lands that the deck has. But if you're on the play and you only got 2 lands and then a bunch of like 3, 4 drops, whatever, and your dork gets killed, like okay, well, the worst case scenario happened. What are you going to do now? Did you prepare for this, or did you keep a hand without considering like what your opponent could be doing?
Excellent. Well, Brant, this is the end of the guide, so I'm going to open up the floor to you again. Please feel free to let us know what's going on in your world or anything you want to shout out.
I mean, yeah, like first, shout out to you. You've put in a ton of effort into this channel, and we've talked about it. Me and Lee have talked about it on our podcast. So you and Drew, keep up the good work that you're doing. I really appreciate you having me on. I hope that this was super helpful. And for folks that like aren't used to playing decks like this, like aren't used to, playing a bunch of creatures and sort of evaluating the game turns ahead and like telling a story and picking a plan, like this is a really good deck for folks to like take sort of the next step, I think, if they're typically only doing one thing really well. So it's also just really fun. Like, I know folks get a lot of joy out of like sitting back and just playing removal and playing control, or they get a lot of joy out of like, I play hasty, fast creatures and like that's all I do and like burn spells and stuff. This deck is just like really fun. It's really challenging because you're not, like I said, you're not playing the cream of the crop when it comes to the cards that have been printed in this game. So it sort of forces you to put a plan in place, and it's like very, very rewarding when you pick a lane, you pick the right spot, you do it all at the right timing, the right turn, and you do it all like against your opponent's plan. It's really, really rewarding and it feels awesome. So I would say that like if folks want to pick this deck up, I highly encourage it. It's a ton of fun. And yeah, I mean, I'm always here too. If like, and I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm like the world's greatest Grist player or whatever. I cut a lot of good cards for a lot of bad cards that I just really like. Because because like you mentioned, I'm a vibes guy, and I like to play on vibes. But if anyone does have questions, or if they have like suggestions, like I think that Euclidean hatchery thing, I think that's really cool. And those are cards that I don't know about. So if someone's just like, "Go, Grant, why are you playing this?" Odds are they're probably right, and I should find some space for it. So
Well, Grant, I appreciate you coming on to talk about Grist, the Hunger Tide, in this deck guide. I'll make sure to link Mile High Mana in the description. And yeah, really appreciate what you and Lee are doing as well. And, putting our local scene out there. I love that. I love that Duel Commander's growing. And yeah, thank you so much.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Bill. Appreciate you.
And that is the Grist the Hunger Tide deck guide. This commander is sticky, grindy, and funny in a cruel way. You win by making your opponents feel like they've lost 5 turns ago, but only realize it now. If you enjoy content like this, check out another deck guide on screen and feel free to like and subscribe. And tell us in the comments how you feel Grist's place is in the meta. Until the next time, keep it creepy.